Hello, environmental science scholars. Welcome to the next lesson in Tutorial 5, looking at Lesson 5.3, the Phosphorus Cycle. So why do living things need phosphorus? Two main things. One, phosphorus can be found in the chemical source of energy that all living things need to survive. So if you remember back in cellular respiration, the whole point of that is to be able to get out the stored energy in our food and then convert it to energy our cells can use. Well, that energy source is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. So there's definitely phosphorus in there, and we need that to be able to make that in our cells. Plus, it's also present in our genetic material, in DNA and also RNA. Looking at this image here on the right, all of these little P's, those are all the little phosphates that are present in DNA. And the same can be said or seen in RNA. However, the only source of phosphorus is found in rocks. It is not found in the atmosphere. There is no gas form or vapor form of phosphorus. The only source is found in rocks. Because of that, it is considered to be a major limiting nutrient in the environment, especially in aquatic ecosystems, such as lakes or rivers or even oceans. Because again, the only source is found in rocks. However, all living things, as you can see, need that phosphorus. So how are they going to get that phosphorus if it's only found in rocks? What must happen to those rocks to release that phosphorus into the environment? And then how can that even get into an aquatic environment? Well, those rocks must be broken down. That process of breaking down rocks is called weathering. And there are two main ways that rocks are naturally weathered that we're looking at today is by water and also by wind. That's going to be helping to then break down that rock, releasing phosphorus and other elements as well. But what happens then to that phosphorus after it's released? Well, some of that can become immediately dissolved in water. Either it's breaking down that rock that's right next to the ocean, or maybe it's breaking down a rock in the mountain and that ends up dissolving into a nearby river. Maybe ends up in runoff, ends up in a nearby body of water, and then plant or algae can then immediately use it. Or that phosphorus will end up in parts of the ground or soil. And then that will become available for producers or other things to use. So here we are going to be starting to look at the process of how does phosphorus cycle throughout the environment. Again, there is no step 1, step 2, or step 3. You just pick a part and then cycle and follow and track where does that phosphorus go through the living and non-living parts of the environment. So we already looked at the non-living part. It was trapped in that rock. It was broken down and then released into the environment. Either ends up into a body of water or ends up into the ground. Well, plants or other primary producers are going to be the first living things readily using that phosphorus. However, with plants, the only way for them to then use that phosphorus is that phosphorus must be dissolved in water first, and then their roots can then absorb it and assimilate that into the tissues of the plant. And then if you track that, how does that phosphorus get into other living things that are not just those primary producers? Well, consumers must then take up, incorporate that phosphorus when they eat that plant, either when we're eating a salad or that panda bear is eating bamboo, or even when we eat other organisms that ate plants. So, for example, cows feed on grass, which have the phosphorus. When we eat a cow in the form of a steak or hamburger, we're going to get that phosphorus in us also. We can also obtain phosphorus when we drink water if it's been dissolved in that water. Then a way for that phosphorus to return back into the environment is when producers and then also other consumers die and then decompose, by bacteria or fungi. And then those nutrients, such as phosphorus and other things, return back into the soil. All of those nutrients, such as phosphorus, in the soil that have maybe been released from things decomposing are now available for plants to then reabsorb and then kind of, continue that cycle. So here's a little graph or a little image looking at the overall phosphorus cycle. We have weathering of rock, bringing down that weathered rock with that released phosphorus down to a body of water or into a nearby field. If it's dissolved to a body of water, plants or algae can then immediately absorb and use it. If not, it must be dissolved in the soil, and then plants absorb it through their roots and incorporate it. Then it ends up in consumers, such as those cows, when they eat the grass. And then when the animals poop or when they die and decompose, then we have decomposers in the ground breaking down those tissues and returning all that back into the soil for then plants to then reabsorb. So that's the natural cycling of phosphorus that's been going on for a very, very, very long time. Now let's finish up by looking at how have humans impacted this cycle. Well, since the Industrial Revolution, we've been starting to produce and use a lot more synthetic or factory made fertilizers. Fertilizers are what farmers or even gardeners add to their crops or to their gardens to allow their crops to grow. And within that contains nutrients, mainly nitrogen and also phosphorus. So when those are added into the environment, we're adding a lot more additional phosphorus, for example, than that it was naturally found there. Plus, other soaps, such as laundry detergents or dish detergents, contain this phosphorus. So we have added additions of this phosphorus into the environment. So if it gets into the environment, let's say we sprinkle it on our crops, for example, that phosphorus and those fertilizers can actually leave that field in, let's say, a rain event. And then that causes those fertilizers to then run off into a nearby body of water. That can cause some major issues right there. And this overall process called eutrophication. So let's say we have runoff of fertilizer from a farm or detergents. Let's say a spill of like soap and stuff like that. Soapy water enters a body of water. Again, those are nutrients. We have algae living in that water going, yay, lots and lots of nutrients. Awesome. That causes an algal bloom to occur. Issues with that means that can actually cover a body of water, causing that algae to actually block out sunlight below. So maybe if there are some maybe freshwater plants out there that may no longer be able to do photosynthesis due to that blocking of sunlight. Well, eventually that algae dies and is decomposed by bacteria in the water. Well, in order for those bacteria to break down and decompose that algae, they actually consume a lot of oxygen. That leads to a very significant decrease in oxygen concentration in that body of water, leading to a condition called hypoxia. Well, if there's less oxygen now in the water, can anything survive? No. So that causes fish and other wildlife to leave if they can, but if they can't, lack of oxygen means essentially suffocation and dying. And we've seen that in a lot of nearby bodies of water, nearby farmlands. We've seen this eutrophication process in, for example, Lake Erie in Ohio, where we have lots of farmland nearby, lots of runoff leading into Lake Erie, causing these huge algal blooms and these huge massive fish die-offs afterwards. Why? It's because of all these events right here. They mainly die because of suffocation, lack of oxygen. All right, guys, that finishes up looking at the phosphorus cycle. Don't forget to answer those practice questions and finish your unit notes.